On a quiet street corner, nestled between coffee shops and boutiques, the warmth of an upscale cafe radiates through its windows, promising solace in the midst of chaos. The city has long been a place of power, drama, and influence, but today, it's the setting for something unexpected, something that will alter the course of a young man's life in ways no one can predict. And here, we meet Barron Trump, a 20-year-old university student, sitting at a corner table, laptop open, a steaming cup of coffee beside him. There's nothing special about him, at least not at first glance. He looks like any other young man in the city, trying to blend in to carve out his own identity in a world that already seems to have a narrative written for him. But there's a quiet depth to him, a kind of intensity that only becomes apparent if you linger long enough. His dark eyes hold an unspoken weariness, like someone who's been watching from the sidelines for years, waiting to find a moment to step into the story on his own terms. As Barron types out notes for his next class, lost in the comfort of routine, he is unaware that today will be different. The cafe around him is filled with the usual morning crowd. Businessmen scanning emails, students gossiping over lattes, tourists fidgeting with their phones. But the subtle hum of normality is about to be shattered by an intrusion, loud and brash. A man bursts through the door. His voice cuts through the ambient noise, sharp and confrontational. He's in his late 40s, wearing a wrinkled jacket, and there's an energy about him, a kind of recklessness that seems out of place in this quiet sanctuary. Without any hesitation, he locks eyes with Barron, his glare hard and accusatory. "You," the man yells, his voice rising in a fury that turns heads. "You're nothing but a puppet." The cafe freezes. For a heartbeat, it's as if time has paused. Everyone's sensing the tension in the air, unsure of what's happening or why. Barron looks up from his laptop, his face betraying no immediate reaction. He's accustomed to attention, though not like this. Not this kind of hostility, not in this kind of setting. The stranger's words continue to fly, sharp and biting. "You think you're above it all, don't you? You've got it easy, hiding behind your family's name. But you're just like the rest of them, all of you." And with that, Barron's calm world is interrupted, the scene shifting from mundane to surreal in a heartbeat. The cafe's hum returns in the wake of the outburst, but now there's an electric tension in the air. Whispers ripple across the room like a wave. Is this just another incident of political aggression or something deeper? Why Barron and why now? But there's something even more compelling in the air, something not yet understood by anyone in the cafe. Least of all Barron himself. What will happen next? How will he respond to this aggressive outburst? Would he rise to the occasion and defend himself, or retreat into the shadows? This is the moment that will set the stage for everything that follows. Because what happens, here in this unassuming cafe on this ordinary morning, will change Barron's life in ways no one could have predicted. Barron feels his heart rate spike as the man's words echo through the cafe, sharper than the clink of silverware on porcelain. His fingers hover above the keyboard for a moment longer than they should, as though his mind is trying to process what just happened, trying to make sense of the scene unfolding before him. He's used to being a public figure, or at least being known, but this is something different. There's anger in the stranger's eyes, an emotion that Barron hasn't seen directed at him so clearly in a long time. The cafe, once filled, with low conversations and the hum of a coffee machine, has gone eerily silent. The man's words hang in the air like a challenge, daring Barron to respond. His first instinct is to shrink away, to let someone else step in, to make it someone else's problem. But as his eyes flick across the room, something catches him off guard. A young woman sitting 2 tables away, her brow furrowed with concern, her lips pressed into a tight line. The stranger's voice is unrelenting. "How long do you think you can keep hiding behind your daddy's name, huh? How long before people see you for what you really are?" Barron's face flushes, his jaw tensing. A tight ball of frustration begins to build in his chest. He's always known that his name has carried weight, always known that it's been the subject of both admiration and resentment. But in that moment, it feels like more than just a label. It feels like a chain. He's been defined by it, trapped, by it, all his life. He spent years walking the thin line between wanting to stand apart from his family's legacy and having no idea who he is outside of it. "Leave him alone," the woman at the nearby table speaks up, her voice calm, but firm. She stands up, her eyes unwavering as she faces the stranger. Barron blinks in surprise, momentarily distracted from the chaos unfolding around him. The woman looks to be in her late 20s, wearing a navy blue sweater and a thick scarf, her dark hair pulled into a messy bun. She's not particularly tall nor imposing, but there's a strength in the way she stands, her shoulders squared, her gaze never faltering from the man's face. The stranger turns toward her with an expression that mixes amusement and disdain. "Oh, look at that, someone else with an opinion," he sneers. "Why don't you take your little act somewhere else, sweetheart?" But she doesn't back down. This is a public space. Just like it's your right to be here, it's his right to not be shouted at. So why don't you take your anger and leave him alone? There's a brief silence, the tension between the stranger and the woman hanging heavy in the air. Barron can feel his pulse racing, the weight of everyone's eyes on him. His breath feels shallow, like he's forgotten how to breathe properly. He's caught between two instincts, the desire to blend in, to shrink away, and the urge to confront the man who is making him feel small, irrelevant. But before he can decide which side of himself to embrace, the stranger's next words come like a punch to the gut, just like the rest of them. "I don't know why I even bothered." And with that, the man turns on his heel, pushing past the woman without a second glance and storms out of the cafe. The room breathes again. The buzz of conversation returns, but the damage has already been done. Barron sits motionless, staring at his untouched coffee, the steam now gone, leaving behind only a cold cup. The noise of the cafe feels distant, almost muffled, as though he's submerged in water. For a long moment it feels like the whole world has paused and he's stuck in a loop, his mind reeling from the man's words, the energy of the confrontation still crackling in the air. The woman, who'd intervened, so fearlessly sits back down at her table, but not before she glances over at Barron with a look that's both curious and thoughtful. She seems to hesitate for just a fraction of a second, as if wondering whether she should say something to him. But instead, she picks up her coffee cup and takes a slow sip, as if nothing has happened at all. Barron exhales, a heavy, frustrated breath that seems to escape him before he can stop it. His fingers curl around his mug, the warmth of the ceramic offering little comfort. He doesn't know what to do with himself in this moment. He doesn't know what to do with the thoughts swirling in his head. Should he let it go? Brush it off, like every other person who's thrown a harsh word his way in the past? Or should he do something about it? Take action? Show the world that he's not just the sum of his last name? It's a question he's asked himself countless times, and yet he's never had an answer. The silence stretches on for a while, until Barron finally looks up, his gaze meeting the woman's once again. This time, she smiles faintly at him, and it's a small, almost imperceptible gesture, but it feels like a lifeline in that moment. "I'm sorry about that," she says, her voice quieter now, but still warm. "People can be, well, people. Don't let it get to you." Barron nods, his throat tight. "Thanks," he manages, though the word feels hollow on his lips. He's grateful, but he's not sure how much it helps. The whole exchange left him unsettled, unsure of how to process the sudden influx of emotions. The woman tilts her head. "You're Barron Trump, right?" she asks, her tone soft but laced with curiosity. He freezes. Of course she knows who he is. Everyone knows who he is. But there's something about hearing his name in this context, after everything that just happened, that makes him want to shrink into the corner. He nods, his eyes flicking away from hers for a brief moment. "Yeah, that's me. I thought." "So," she says, her gaze thoughtful. "I didn't mean to make you uncomfortable. Well, I don't like bullies." "Neither do I," Barron admits quietly. And for the first time in a long while, he feels a flicker of something resembling connection. He's not alone in this. Not entirely. The woman doesn't push any further. She simply returns to her coffee, taking a sip as if the world has already moved on. But Barron's mind is spinning, his thoughts a whirlwind of confusion, anger, and frustration. The encounter with the stranger was unsettling, but it's the look in the woman's eyes, the soft empathy she offered without asking for anything in return, that stirs something inside him. It feels like an invitation to finally confront the parts of himself he's hidden away for so long. As Barron sits there, lost in his thoughts, he realizes that this moment, the interruption, the shout, the silence afterward, has shifted something within him. The world outside the cafe continues to churn, but Barron can no longer ignore the pull to change, to break free from the weight of his name. But the question remains: how? How does he start? And where will it lead him? In this moment, Barron is standing at the edge of a decision, teetering on the brink of something that could alter his life forever. The days following the cafe incident unfold with an unsettling calm. Barron can't shake the image of the man's face, the anger in his voice, the way it felt like his very existence was being questioned, and yet the aftermath is quieter than he expected. He goes to class, sits through lectures, attends the social events he's obligated to. But none of it feels the same. It's like the world has shifted, and he's still trying to find his footing on the ground that suddenly feels uneven. The woman from the cafe, whose name he learned later was Clara, occasionally crosses his mind. He wonders if she's forgotten about the whole thing, if she's moved on with her life, not giving another thought to the young man who seems so entangled in the expectations and judgments of others. Yet in the days that follow, Barron notices something. There's a subtle pressure building around him, as if the world has become more acute, more pointed. The whispers follow him wherever he goes. In the hallways at school, in cafes, even online. People know who he is, and it's not just his last name they're fixating on anymore. It's his silence, his seeming inability to stand up for himself in the face of criticism. His social media feed becomes a barrage of comments, some mocking, some defensive, but all feeding into the growing storm. People who used to be acquaintances, friends even, start weighing in with their opinions. Does he really believe in anything? One post asks. Is he just another rich kid too afraid to make a stand? Another one reads, they're not outright attacks, but the underlying judgment is unmistakable. Barron wants to ignore it. He tells himself it's just noise, that he should let it roll off his back. But each comment stings, each post carving a deeper doubt into his mind. He spends sleepless nights scrolling through his phone, reading the posts, trying to find a way to defend himself that feels true to who he is. But each response feels more hollow than the last. It's in one of these late-night spirals that Clara reaches out again. Her message is simple but cuts through the haze of his frustration. I saw the things people are saying. I just want you to know that not everyone is like that. You're more than what they think you are. The words strike him with an unexpected force, like a lifeline in the middle of a storm. But they're not enough to calm the chaos inside him. He wants to be more than the son of a political figure. He wants to find something real for himself, something that isn't tainted by his family's shadow. But the more he tries to step away from it, the more it feels like it's pulling him back in, like an anchor he can't escape. The final straw comes when Barron's father, Donald Trump, calls him. Barron, you need to step up. Show people that you're not just hiding behind your mother or me, his father says, the voice on the other end of the phone sharp and expectant. People are starting to talk, and you need to handle it. Public perception isn't something you can ignore. The words hit Barron like a cold slap, but it's the weight of the expectation behind them that makes him freeze. It's as though his father is not just speaking to him, but to the version of Barron that the world has created. This image of him that feels increasingly out of his control. Okay, Barron says, his voice tight. I'll do something. But the decision feels wrong, like a part of him is being sold again. He hangs up, staring at his phone, but now it feels like a foreign object in his hand. What does it mean to do something when he's been conditioned to follow a script that isn't his own? That night, Barron lies in bed, staring at the ceiling. He feels the weight of expectation pressing down on him from every angle: his family, his peers, even the strangers who seem to have formed an opinion about him without ever really knowing him. And in this moment, Barron realizes he's at a crossroads. Every step forward feels like a betrayal, and yet every moment he stays still feels like surrender. The self-doubt claws at him, the weight of his last name heavier than ever. The question looms larger than it ever has. Who is Barron Trump really without the mask of his family's legacy? And more importantly, who does he want to become when the noise finally fades away? The tipping point comes on an ordinary Tuesday afternoon when Barron decides he can no longer stand idly by. The weight of his family's name, the expectations that have been piling on his shoulders, and the haunting words of that stranger in the cafe, everything has been building to this moment. He has spent weeks caught in a cycle of uncertainty, but now, something inside him finally snaps. It's a text from Clara that tips the scale. There's a rally happening tomorrow. Some of your family's supporters are planning to protest, and some people are planning to show up to challenge them. It's going to be intense. Are you going? He reads it several times, each time feeling the pull of something bigger than himself, a force calling him to stand up, to finally make a decision, not just for himself, but for the image that has been thrust upon him. His eyes flicker to the half-done homework on his desk, the untouched coffee on his nightstand, and then back to Clara's message. His thumb hovers over the keyboard, torn between responding or letting it go. In a moment of frustration, Barron stands, grabs his jacket, and heads out the door. He's not sure where he's going, but something inside him tells him to get out of his head, out of his comfort zone. The rally Clara mentioned isn't far from where he lives. The closer he gets, the more he feels the weight of the decision. His legs feel like lead as they move on their own accord, as though his body is leading him somewhere he can't quite comprehend yet. The streets are crowded, buzzing with energy as people begin to gather. The protesters on one side, waving signs with slogans that echo through the air. On the other, counter-protesters, equally vocal, but with an edge to their tone. Barron's heart races as he steps into the fray, the din of chants and shouts surrounding him. He watches the chaos unfold, unsure of where to stand, what to do, and then, as if by instinct, he spots Clara in the crowd, standing firm with a group of young activists. She waves at him when she sees him, her face warm and encouraging, amidst the sea of tension. Barron hesitates, unsure of what to say or how to explain himself, but she seems to understand, giving him a reassuring nod. "Glad you came," she says, her voice cutting through the noise. "We need people who actually care, not just the ones shouting slogans." That's when it hits him. This isn't about choosing a side or playing the role people expect him to play. It's about finding a voice that's entirely his, cutting through the noise. He isn't just the son of his father. He isn't just a name. He's Barron. For the first time, he feels the fire of his own beliefs stirring, a sharp clarity he hasn't felt in years. But before he can process it fully, a shout breaks his focus. A scuffle erupts near the center of the protest. Barron watches as a few individuals are being shoved, the atmosphere growing increasingly hostile. The noise escalates as the crowd grows more agitated. A moment of tension pulls at Barron's chest. This isn't just about standing in a crowd. It's about the risk of standing up for what he believes in, even if it's uncomfortable. He feels the pull of responsibility and fear battling within him. Should he turn around? Should he leave? Go back to the safety of his apartment and pretend none of this is his fight? But then, through the noise, he sees something that stops him cold. A man in the crowd shouts his name, Barron Trump. A few others turn their heads, as well, eyes filled with judgment. The tension inside him intensifies. He could retreat, disappear into the anonymity of the crowd and let someone else handle it. But he doesn't. He steps forward, heart pounding, the world around him blurring into a swirl of voices. In that moment, Barron realizes that there's no turning back. This is the crossroads, and this is where he begins to define who he really is, apart from everything and everyone who has defined him until now. He doesn't know what will happen next, but he knows that this is where the change starts. He turns to Clara, his voice barely above a whisper. "I'm ready." And for the first time in his life, Barron feels like he's standing on solid ground. The rally reaches a boiling point, and the air feels thick with tension. Barron stands at the edge of the protest, heart racing, watching as the crowd grows, more agitated. The opposing sides have begun to clash, shouting, pushing, and jostling one another. It's chaotic, and yet Barron can't pull himself away. This is it. This is the moment he's been building toward, the moment when he finally chooses who he's going to be, who he wants to become, and what he's willing to stand for. Clara is by his side, her expression determined, but she senses his hesitation. "You're not just here to watch, Barron. You're here to make a difference. You have to speak up." Her words cut through the fog in his mind, and he knows she's right. This isn't about observing or standing on the sidelines. If he wants to forge a new identity, if he wants to be more than the weight of his last name, this is his opportunity to prove it. But the truth settles in his gut like a stone. If he steps into this, there's no going back. His life won't be the same afterward. As if reading his internal struggle, Clara gives him an encouraging nod. But before Barron can make the decision, a new voice rises over the din. A man steps to the front of the rally, a familiar face in the crowd, his presence commanding attention. He's one of the more outspoken figures in the group, a man known for his fiery speeches and sharp rhetoric. Barron recognizes him immediately. He's one of the vocal critics of the Trump family, and his words cut like a knife. "Enough of this," the man shouts. "You're all just puppets. The Trumps have done nothing but tear this country apart. You think you can hide behind a facade? You're just as guilty." The crowd roars in agreement, the intensity building with each word. Barron feels every eye in the crowd turn toward him. The man's gaze fixes on him like a hawk spotting its prey. "Barron Trump, you want to show us something real? Prove you're not just your father's son? Or are you too scared to speak up?" The challenge is unmistakable. The world feels like it's holding its breath, and Barron's heart pounds in his chest. He knows what people expect from him. He's supposed to retreat, to stay silent, to be the figurehead of a legacy he doesn't want. But he's not that person anymore. His thoughts spiral, but they don't feel like doubt anymore. They feel like resolve. He steps forward, his legs steady despite the weight of the moment, and the crowd's murmur intensifies. Barron lifts his head, searching for Clara in the sea of faces. She's watching him, her eyes steady and full of encouragement. Air hums with anticipation as Barron steps into the center, the man's words still hanging in the air. The crowd goes silent, waiting for him to speak, and in that silence, Barron finds his voice. "I'm not here to defend my family," he says, his voice clear but steady. "I'm here because I'm trying to figure out who I am, who I want to be. I'm not perfect, and I don't have all the answers, but I'm done letting other people tell me who I should be, what I should believe, or what I should stand for." A hush falls over the crowd, and Barron's words seem to echo in the charged air. He can feel the weight of the moment pressing down on him, but there's a strange sense of peace beneath the uncertainty. For the first time, he feels like he's speaking not just to the crowd, but to himself. "I know I'll never escape my last name, but that's not who I want to be." Barron continues, his voice growing stronger. "I'm here to learn, to grow, and to take responsibility for my actions, not because of who I'm related to, but because I choose to. I won't let anyone else define me." The words are like a ripple in the sea of tension. Some in the crowd respond with stunned silence, others with cautious nods. Barron can feel the shift in the air, a subtle but palpable change. The man who had challenged him stands frozen, mouth open in shock, and the crowd shifts uneasily, unsure of how to respond. And then, in an unexpected turn, a few voices begin to rise in support. A lone clap, then another, and soon the entire crowd breaks into hesitant applause. It's not perfect, not a full endorsement, but it's a start. A recognition that Barron is taking a stand, not just as a member of a family, but as a person. an individual with a voice of his own. The moment feels like a release, as if Barron has finally exhaled after holding his breath for years. He isn't just standing on the sidelines anymore, he's at the center of his own story, and the future, for the first time in his life, feels like it's his to shape. Clara steps beside him, her face filled with pride, and Barron realizes something. It wasn't about winning the crowd over or impressing anyone. It was about speaking his truth, no matter how messy, uncertain, or imperfect it might be. For the first time, Barron feels free. The past no longer has the power to control him, and the future feels like something he can finally take into his own hands. The stakes have never been higher, but Barron knows one thing for sure. He is no longer the passive observer in his life. The world will never stop trying to define him, but now, he knows how to stand tall and say, "This is who I am." The rally eventually winds down, the tension dissipating as people begin to disperse. Barron stands with Clara, still absorbing the weight of everything that's just transpired. The crowd is scattered, but the silence that follows feels heavy with meaning. The confrontation is over, but the real shift has only just begun. As they walk away from the chaos, Clara turns to Barron, her voice soft but filled with a quiet strength. "You did well," she says, and there's a depth in her eyes that makes Barron pause. She isn't just speaking about the words he said. She's acknowledging the courage it took for him to speak them. Barron nods, his mind still racing. He's finally taken control, but the reality of it all is settling in. There's no going back now. He can't just slip into the background or hide behind the shadow of his family's legacy anymore. For the first time, he's made his own choice. He's defined himself not through the lens of who people think he should be, but by who he truly is. And that's a terrifying, exhilarating feeling. The next few days are a blur of mixed reactions. Some people praise him for speaking out, for stepping away from the preconceived notion that he's just another figurehead in a political dynasty. Others, however, continue to criticize him, calling him a sellout, a weak link in the family chain. But Barron no longer feels the need to defend himself. He's not running from the judgment or the expectations anymore. He's learning to live with them, to grow past them. In the quiet of his apartment one evening, Barron picks up his phone and scrolls through messages. There's one from his father, a simple text. "I saw what you said. Be careful. You have to remember who you represent." The message doesn't sting like it once would have. Barron doesn't feel the crushing weight of obligation anymore. Instead, he feels a sense of peace, a calm that comes from knowing he's forging his own path. He doesn't need to conform to anyone's idea of who he should be. His father's words, though well-meaning, no longer have the power to dictate his choices. Later that week, Barron finds himself at a small cafe once again. It's a familiar place, the same spot where he'd been confronted weeks ago. But this time, the atmosphere is different. The tension he'd felt before is gone, replaced by a quiet sense of clarity. He takes a seat at a corner table and orders a coffee, looking out the window as life continues outside. Clara joins him shortly after, her smile warm but knowing. She sits down across from him, and for a long moment, they simply look at each other. There's no need for words. The journey they've both been on is reflected in their shared silence. They've both learned something vital. That identity is not something given to you. It's something you fight for, something you create with each decision you make, each step you take. "I think I'm starting to get it," Barron says quietly, breaking the silence. Clara raises an eyebrow. "Get what?" "How to live for myself. Not for anyone else, not for any image, but for who I am." His voice carries the quiet conviction of someone who has found their footing, someone who is beginning to see themselves clearly for the first time. Clara smiles, her eyes soft, with understanding. "It's a process, but I think you're on your way." Barron takes a deep breath, feeling the weight of everything he's learned in the past weeks, the confrontation, the choices, the doubts, the growth. He's standing on the edge of something new, and while the path ahead is uncertain, it no longer feels impossible. For the first time, He feels like he can trust himself to walk it. As they sit together, the world outside bustling with activity, Barron finally understands something important. It's not about escaping the past or distancing himself from the legacy of his name. It's about claiming his own space in the world, about defining who he is on his terms. The future is a blank page, and Barron now holds the pen. And with that thought, he smiles, because for the first time it feels like the story he's writing is entirely his own. "I think I'm ready," Barron says softly, a hint of resolve in his voice. And this time, he knows it's true.